we're back again with another episode of the Learning Insights podcast. And trust me, today is going to be amazing. We're going to be having a very great conversation. Yes, I said so. And I'm not here alone. You know me. My name is Joanna, and I have other people on the show today as usual. First, we have Okpe.
Hello guys, so nice to be here.
And then we have Grace.
It's nice to be here again.
Now to our special guest. He's a man of many works, but today we'll be focusing on his role as the Senior Special Assistant on Education Policy to the Honourable Commissioner of Basic and Secondary Education, Katsina State. His name is Mr. Kizito Chris-Chidi. Welcome.
Thank you, everyone, for having me. Thank you, Jonathan.
So nice
Well,
to have
Hi,
you,
guys.
sir.
Yeah.
Good to see
How's
you.
everybody doing?
Very well.
You don't sound
You're
well.
fine.
What happened? What's the issue? Talk to me. What's going on?
Nothing's really going on now. I mean, Nigerians, we just get used to how everything is. And
But
have to
dollar is
continue.
coming down now. You people should be happy small.
But the prices of things are not coming down.
Give them time. I believe in my people. Very soon, the
Well,
prices. Take my. Don't take my word for it.
Prices never go down. No.
They only go up.
So, sir, Mr. Kizito, can you tell us a bit about your role?
Okay. So, my name is Kizito, like you've mentioned, and
Yeah.
it's good to be here. Thank you for having me. Before my current role, I worked with a startup, an edtech startup.
Oh,
I
really?
did that for
Oh.
maybe like 5 years.
Wow.
And then, during the elections, I having conversations with my current boss, totally unrelated to my current role.
Mm-hmm.
But you know how it is during election, everyone has an idea of how to fix the country and all of
Yeah.
that. So I just mounted in one of our conversations, I think, we can do this in the education space and all of that, And it turns out that she was, headhunted for the role.
Oh.
Then she was like, okay, that thing you said, and we have a conversation, and then now we're here.
Mhm.
That's
Interesting.
Yeah.
So was it just a progression from the edtech space to your current role now?
Well, I think, in a sense, it was a progression
Okay.
because at the edtech firm I worked with,
Yeah.
we had several bottlenecks,
Okay.
Oh.
usually around regulation,
Yeah.
government engagement and all of that,
Yeah.
and up at that point, I was already thinking from a policy perspective,
Mhm.
how to
SIM
be
cards.
involved. Then there was almost that regular mantra, what can you do to change the country and all of
Yeah.
that, so I'm like, okay, we've been in this education space for a while. We've observed
Yeah.
some things. If
Yeah.
some things could be better, this would be
Yeah.
how it would go. And then, I think serendipity played a role,
Mm.
but I never envisaged that I would move from private sector to,
Government.
government.
But what's one shocker for you, like in the educational space? Like, what's one shocker that it really shocked you? Like when you saw that this is the reality?
Well, I think it has to do with, adoption of education,
Okay.
particularly in the North.
Yeah.
I'm sure you're all familiar with the scary statistics and all out of school children and all of that. So getting on ground and, meeting some of the things, we saw
Actually
on
seeing
ground,
them.
it sort of moved me from a passion perspective, imagining that I had the benefit of quality education,
Yeah.
And then seeing that some kids may never have access to a certain degree of education,
Yeah.
having that limit already,
Yeah.
And how that, you just imagine, I think someone mentioned something one time about how that some of the kids that you see on the streets, if you still think that they are still far off from your reality, wait until maybe years down the line and, there's some issue around some, harm or whatever it is. And then it comes to, affect your own children. So, just meeting some of those hard evidence or hard facts on ground.
Yeah.
Sort of like gave me that come to reality moment that this thing is not a joke actually.
Yeah.
So,
And the stats, like, because we always hear talk about stats. So I did economics, so I
Yeah.
had to deal with a lot of stats.
Yeah.
So being on the field and seeing how things
Yeah.
are, for people like that listening, is the reality worse than the stats that we're hearing?
So that's a good question. With the stats, right? There's always the issue of the source, the quality of the data gathering process, what metrics were used, what parameters were used, and all of that. So take, for example, you go to places where they don't even speak English, right? And then you have people who are gathering the data having to depend on interpreters and all.
Yeah.
There's going to be some distortion
Definitely.
in a sense, So to a large extent, some of those numbers are close to reality. In some cases, they are far exaggerated.
Or exaggerated?
Yeah, they are far exaggerated because you also have to pay attention to, like I said, the parameters and how they came about that, especially when those sources are coming from unrecognized or unverified sources. So, for example, if you have like DFIs or those kind of international institutions, you know that there's a process that they go through before they, push out those numbers and all. But to a large extent, it's just in the middle.
I'm surprised you said exaggerated because for some reason I thought that it would be, less than.
There are several factors too as well. So for example, this is not a data conversation, but if you visit a family, for example, and you want to know how many children go to school, right? You may have a case where there's maybe like 2 wives, 3 wives. Some people have gone to the farm and all of that, You also have to pay attention to the issues around security too in those areas too as well. So there are cases where you could have approximations. Household of this, let's just put it at this number, and because in those areas you have frequent migrations, right? So some data may not be representative of what it may just be temporary in the sense that maybe these people are still in transit. So for example, if you have some case of insurgency or any of those, you get people migrating from one area to another from a safety perspective, and all of that. So there's a lot of context, that needs to be put in.
So with your kind of job, with the insecurity, the problems you get to face, what's your driving force? Because you must have a driving force. There are times you want to give up on the job because of the kind of problems you get to face, especially traveling to rural areas, having to deal with uneducated people. Some people don't even want to listen up when you talk about education. So how do you deal with it? What drives you?
That's a good question. I think for me, primarily, it's the vision of my principal, right? The Honourable Commissioner. She came in from the private sector. So I suspect that if she wasn't from the private sector, I may not have jumped on board the role, because I did some public sector work and I don't think I lasted like 2 months.
What was the issue?
Why?
I left because I'm coming from a place where there is a lot of agility. Things are fast-paced. Decision making is fast-paced and all. And having to go through bureaucratic processes and all.
Government can be long.
But I bought into her vision. Right. And that speaks to the power of leadership, right? The vision was very compelling about how that we can contribute our own quota, moving from being armchair critics as to this is what can be done to really going deep, and then at some point I have a 1 year, 1 month old daughter, and I sort of imagined what world she would live in, and I saw that it won't be fair if I had the opportunity to contribute to how that world would be better in any capacity,
Wow.
right? Not to pay it forward, So yeah, that was another, driving force too as well, So every time I get to go on the field, meet with young kids, the image of my daughter just flashes past. I mean, so in her case, things are better because, she's in an environment that has some of those necessities and all of that. But I mean, some of these kids don't have that, So I decided to just take the plunge, and just to see things for myself. I'm naturally curious too as well. So that helped.
That's very deep.
That's nice.
So, like you mentioned, the issue of adopting education. So, how do you deal with that? Like, how do you deal with that? Like, I'm giving you education.
Yeah.
It's free.
It's good.
But you don't see the importance. You don't see the value.
Yeah.
And it's almost like I'm begging you to learn, but it's going to benefit you. So, like, how do you navigate that?
All right, that's a good one too, because largely basic education in Katsina is largely free.
Yeah.
And I mean, kudos to the government. A lot of investment has already been made, paying of fees, rehabilitation and all of those things, And it was a challenge for us to getting in. I mean, for me, it was a shock. I'm like, where I come from, people grab these opportunities with both hands,
And
both legs,
Everything.
head join and all of that. But I think to a large extent, what has helped has been also putting ourselves in their shoes, right? Removing our conceptions, our educated conception or understanding of what adoption, means. And some of the things we did to help with the buy-in, we had to, we conducted several sensitization sessions, I mean, looking back, I'm impressed at some of the things we did,
Is that for the children or
yes, so for the children, the parents, their caregivers, community heads too as well. So there's something we call SBMCs too. That's almost like your PTA, but within a certain cluster. So we had those regular sensitizations to say, education is not a nice to have. It's actually a prerequisite to growth. And then we had several models. So for example, my principal is one of 5 female commissioners / executives in state executive council, so having to show the kids what success looks like. Some of them who come for those sensitization programs, and even their parents, they may never have connected with a public figure. So seeing these public figures that they hear on radio, on TV, flesh and blood, in fact, so we also do donations too as well. And then some of them get to take pictures, it does something to their mindsets. And in the course of having some of this sensitization, we also ensure that we got feedback from them. So most of them, aired some of their concerns. Maybe schools are too far apart, and because of that distance issue of security and all of those things, which we took as good feedback. And, we obviously had a strategy around how to bridge that gap, So it's been an interesting learning experience for me.
Okay. And then I know that this is, I also know that child marriage and then girls' education, like, have you seen that, like, why should my child go to school when they can get married and, I can have, the husband can be providing this for the family. We don't have to suffer. So, like, have you seen cases like that? And do you guys do anything specifically for the girl child education?
Yeah, so, I mean, those cases are actually rampant, right? So shortly before we assumed office, there was a World Bank project called Agile, Adolescent Girl Child Initiative.
Yeah.
And the focus of that was to help bring in more girls into the education net, so to say.
Okay.
And so we had a situation where we would go, the project coordinator and the PIU team, that's what they are called, would go to several areas and, they would conduct skills acquisition programs. They would conduct seminars, they would have regular interactive sessions and all. And at the core of their messaging is how that, girls need to be incentivized, right, to buy into education, right?
Yeah.
So for some of the girls, there's the issue of, not much of my friends are in school, so why is it necessary?
Yeah.
So at some point, the project then had like girl champions or girl child champions to say, this is an example of somebody that is going to school. So several incentives, cash grants, for example, to help with their studies and all of that, helping them to acquire other skills.
Yeah.
And at the center of that was to change that narrative that the purpose of the girl child is not just to get married and give birth. Right?
Yeah.
There are other things that can come out of it. So now we are seeing cases where some of these girls are now even representing the state and even the country. I recall that there was one when we had a particular spelling bee competition, and the spelling bee competition was random. The eventual winner was also one of those girl champions, and then we're told that, she's even going at the time to represent the country in Singapore, right? So that was even validation about their efforts and their processes because the competition was open to all, and imagine them having to spell complex words, right? And then to see this girl scale through that process, it just showed that, okay, there's a connection between the intervention efforts and then the larger picture, so to say, because the girl eventually became the commissioner of education for the state for one day. So imagine you being that girl's friend, for example. You're already pumped, you want to toe that line, and then by the time pictures are shared and you go back home and they're like, this
that's my friend.
our neighbor, it has an effect, so we're just leveraging on that those levels of human interaction, to drive buy-in, and then even because some of these issues are, sometimes they can be deeply seated or cultural. There's also the need to bring other stakeholders into as well. So again, regular engagement with the male folk to say, okay, fine, you'll marry this person, right? Why don't you just give her extra 3 years, right? This is the trajectory of what she can become. And this is the benefit of what it would do for the family, for you, for the family and all of that, and at the heart of all of that it's the girl child herself, right? Truth is, when they have enough incentive, it can spur drive, right? So they can also be adamant to say, okay, let's wait a while, let me finish this, right? And then build on that. So it's also been an interesting learning experience.
I can imagine.
So for in situations whereby we have a girl child that wants to go to school, and then you have her parents that they are adamant on her getting married. So how do you people come in? How do you people help that child?
Okay.
Because I have seen situations whereby the child is forced to end up getting married, and she ends up not going to school. She becomes something else.
So that's a good point. So I think the approach that has worked is this multi-stakeholder approach, right? So, every child is a product of the community, right? So, and that's why we have that level of engagement also with community leaders, right? Because they also play a critical role. Some of them are clerics too as well. So they lead the faith based or the religious component of the community as
Yeah.
well. So helping them see the big picture, right, of what delaying in code gratification in that sense looks like also, helps too. So if in the example you've given, the girl's parents are not obliged, right? I mean, they would probably respect the community leader, right?
Mhm.
Right,
To a
that's
large
actually
extent,
true.
yeah. And based off of that, there can be some leverage, So again, engagements also go with people at that level to say, okay, how can you also drive this message, in your town halls, in your regular religious meetings, and how can you help them see this,
Yeah.
So when you have that level of accountability, chances are that there's somebody who can prevail on the situation,
Yeah. I think in rural areas, most times, like, there's this reverence and respect for
Exactly.
community
Yes.
leaders. And like you
Yes,
said,
yes.
if you have sensitization programs and then they are also aware of the importance of education
yeah.
for the girl
Yeah.
children, it also helps them. They understand the importance and they can,
Yeah.
translate it to the
Yeah.
parents. And just to add to what he said, I know that we also had someone that runs an educational what's it called, an NGO, an educational NGO, and just what you're saying, some of the same issues they are seeing here in Abuja.
very true.
The fact about these people are from the north, most
Yeah.
of them, and this Hausa they speak,
Yeah.
and then you now have people coming, they are donating books in English,
yeah.
but the children cannot even read. And then the same thing about the girl child education. They come and it's like, oh, my friends are not, all my friends
Yeah,
are
she
not
ma-
in
yeah,
school,
that
they are
friends
getting
one.
married, and it's
what's
like,
going on?
it to you can, like, what do you mean your friends? Like, maybe they are younger than their children. They are children and they are saying, my friends are all married. Why am I going to school? So
I
like,
think that's a big motivation.
it's actually everywhere. It's everywhere.
So just to speak to your point on, and I think that's one of the things that we are trying to get right. Because usually when we have NGOs or non-profits partner, the focus is on, let's just give these items out. Not much attention is paid to the content component, assimilation, adoption,
how can you use
and
it
all
really?
of that, So I know that at some point, one of the things that, my principal championed was to reach out to non-profits who had their content in local languages. And we did have a few. And then, sort of like build that level of synergy, right? So there are cases where some of the materials that we distribute have, the English and then the, local languages too as well, so that way they pick it up at that level, and then there's there's that challenge with some certain words not quite carrying the same meaning in local languages and all of that. So that dexterity to be able to know when to switch, to say, okay, this is what this actually means. And then use local examples that they are also familiar with. So, I mean, most of these places are largely agrarian environments. So you can use things that they can relate with, farming and, drive the point home. And then for kids, the beautiful thing about their minds is once they picture a concept, that concept stays, so just meeting them at that level, helps.
I can really relate to what you said about translating, because there's this literacy program that we're working on. The name is ICRA.
Okay.
We are trying to help children learn how to read and speak better by reading through books or stories. And then we are trying to do it in Hausa now. We're trying to translate to Hausa, and like you said, it's a bit of a struggle because like there are some words and some context, some phrases that is a bit difficult, so it can be tricky.
It's not so strong.
So I imagine your what you do. It covers both the Almajiri children, right? Because I know in Katsina there are a lot of Almajiri children on the streets. So how do you people help them to come out of the streets? because I know it's not easy to remove a
Yeah.
child that collects 10 naira, 20 naira from people out of the
Yes.
street.
And
because that
education is
money
one part.
is a motivation for that child. The
Yeah.
child will be, if I can get 500 in a day, why will I be
to
going
Go
to
to
school?
sit down in school.
Yeah, that's a good point. And I mean, for us, it was a reality we had to, deal with. The thing with transformation is it's progressive, right? So you don't, when you hope to change everything within a short period of time, you're shooting yourself in the foot, right?
Sure.
So one of the strategies we leveraged or we deployed was to, within that setting too, they also have leaders too as well,
Yes, go
right?
ahead.
And then, having to engage with them was also very critical, right? And then, sort of finding creative ways to get them to even be in the school setting in the first place, So a conversation could go like, school is free. You don't get to lose anything. You spend this number of hours in school, then after school,
you can
you
go
can
and
do,
continue your work.
and then in the process of getting, some of them in, some of them, by just basic interactions and all, they get to have a different perspective. Another thing we've also tried to do is to also empower the teachers, because a lot of the work falls on
the
them,
teacher,
right? If a teacher makes a class memorable, right, you would see it in you will see it in the faces of the children when you just even enter any random class. So we've had to do several training interventions for the teachers, and even so there are certain cadre of officials called like quality officials whose responsibility it is to make sure that the quality of education is not impacted negatively, and to have like a measure of standardization, So in empowering these teachers as well, and also sharing with them the vision of what things can be, also having incentives too as well. That's how it also cascades to, the children, so more kids are interested to go to school now because there's this particular teacher who teaches in an interesting way. And in the process, we also try to make sure that let the teachers know to pay attention to variance, because kids have there are different levels. If we go into the conversation about special needs children, for example, we see that how they absorb content is pretty much different. So how can you as a teacher spot that? So those are some of the levels we are bringing into in terms of innovative ways to help drive adoption, and our goal is just to make learning creative and fun at the end of the day. Children are fun loving, right? So once you can tweak that notion that school is not hard, school is a place of refuge. And we are seeing situations where some students don't want to leave the schools now, right? Because even at home, they may be going through quite a lot, and then school now becomes like a safe haven where when they're in that space, they know that they can live that reality into another world, So helping to make sure that their leaders are informed about the benefits of school, and also finding creative ways to get them into the school setting, and then empowering the teachers to make sure that they deliver learning that is fun and engaging. It helps with the entire process.
So, like, I know there are challenges when you are trying to implement all these policies.
Yes.
So, what are those challenges you face?
You're putting me on the hot seat. Anyways, I think one of the critical challenges we experienced when we commenced was the issue of data. Right. So we didn't have access to as much data as we would have loved to. Right. So when you come into that kind of office, you want to know what has been done before, but for a while we were walking blind and based off of our own intuition because there wasn't we didn't have numbers, right? But thankful to the executive governor and then to the contribution of my principal, we conducted like a baseline study, which was done in collaboration with some consultants that we had that gave us the numbers, right? Wow. So it now helped us tailor our intervention. So, for example, we didn't know to a large extent how many students were in primary school, for example, across the different LGAs, right? We didn't know which areas were overly populated, hard to reach areas and
even the basics,
all of that, so you don't exactly know how you want to go about your intervention because which issues are primary and all of that. But I mean, in the process of, getting that, conducting that baseline study, there's a lot of perspective now. So we know, the distribution of children in, the different LGAs. There's more perspective as to infrastructure, right? How many schools have toilets, for example? The spread of the schools, right? Because another thing you need to think about is the radius. Sure. If a child is walking 20 kilometers to get to school, it's not making education fun. I mean, look at the weather, and you can imagine the weather situation up north, So knowing how to now use that data and that information to now drive your decision making to say, okay, we need a learning facility here. Or we need to, maybe create like after school learning programs in these areas and all of that as well. So data for me personally and, for us was a key issue because I'm also a numbers person,
So I think I figured.
In my mind, I just want to know what is available and then, but we've been able to overcome that largely. Yeah.
So I think. So are you guys using like an approximated data now? Because I know in the corner there are people that don't even give birth in the hospital. So you don't even know how many number of kids they have. Yeah. They just give birth at home and that's it.
So that's also a good point. So one of the things I have learned with in code delivering education service delivery is the fact that education is not in a silo. There's a greater emphasis on collaboration. So, for example, in the case that you mentioned, there's also a collaboration we have with the Ministry of Health, for example, and then Ministry of Women Affairs too, for example. So cases where, people don't go to the hospitals to give birth, is there like a mechanism for you to be able to capture that data or that detail, So, I mean, with cross-ministry collaboration, for example, Women Affairs, would regularly have their own type of sensitization programs. And, because it's women, they usually turn up, well. So in that too, they're gathering information to say, okay, in this LGA, we had this, and then we can then cross-reference that data too as well. So typically, all of those kinds of gatherings, right, provides like an avenue to really verify, what is on ground. So that's also a concern typically for people that are undocumented. How do you then involve them? Because if they are not captured at that basic level of when they give birth, for example, it means there's a level of exclusion, So the part of the work we've also had to do has been to also engage with them, via the ministries and even at the grassroots level too, as well, to ensure that we're able to capture as much as we can capture.
I think that's pretty nice because then I want to talk about go to budget. Since you say your numbers and budget. So right from...
I forgot it was the economist.
So right from, let me not say secondary school, but university, we've always been hearing that about budget and how education is not really funded in Nigeria as a whole. and in different states.
Mm.
And I think between 2016 to 2019, there was a steady decline in the budget in Katsina State. And the reason why I don't know the exact numbers of the budget, so I think it could be that maybe the budget increased, but the amount meant for education remained the same or whatever like that. But I just want to talk about budget and how is it really, do you think I know we need more money in the education space to carry out different kind of projects. But do you think it's just only about budget, about the money that goes into it? Do you believe that more could be done outside the budget that is given?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. Currently, I mean, with the figures that we have, the allocation to education has actually been the highest in a long while. You know, we're talking of upwards of 20%. You know, and if you benchmark that with the national numbers and all of that, that's quite significant. You know, so it doesn't just stop at the budgetary phase, right? Because it's one thing to declare a budget for certain things, and then it's another thing to see the budget being implemented. You know, so our emphasis has been more on how can we drive implementation, right? And then find ways to plug the leakages. You know, so we've been very particular about accountability. In fact, my principal came up with a mantra. So the ministry is Ministry for Basic and Secondary Education. So we had to create like an acronym around the MBASE, you know, which momentum, bravery. The A stands for accountability, right? So it's making sure that every naira is accounted for as much as can be, right? So if there is a quote that is sent, for example, due diligence will be done on the quote. Are these the best rates you can get these materials for? What other ways can you still get these materials without having to make so much of, you know, cash advancements? And even if you have to, what's the process around procurement? What's the process around if we are installing equipment and stuff, say computers and all of that? What's the process around making sure that the number of units that was budgeted for are the actual number of units that are on ground? So we had cases where, for example, and you know, I like the fact that and I mean I can hype my boss, you know, I like the fact that she's pretty hands-on. So for certain things that you would feel like she shouldn't be involved with by virtue of her status, right? That's not the case. Like, so there was a case where we had to distribute devices, tabs to teachers, right? And typically the way those processes go, you just make the distributions, you know, and then snap pictures and all of that. She was particular about ensuring that, one, the people that were there were supposed to be there. So we mentioned the names of the schools, and then they had to show proof, you know, that they were coming from those places and they were not representing other people, you know. So that alone, if you do that at that level, you know that to a large extent, you're going to get the best out of certain budget, right? Because there's focus on accountability, you know. So that has changed the mindset of the community and, you know, people in the space to say, oh, it's not going to be business as usual, right? There's going to be some level of difference. And then also working with international partners too has also been, you know, very critical too as well. With regards to the quality of the services being, you know, delivered, right? So, I mean, Katsina State is one of the focal states that, you know, that has embarked on this agile project. Other states are, I think, Oyo and Adamawa, call them the Oak states, right? And what we've seen, I mean, the numbers, I think Katsina won like 6 awards last year in terms of implementation and all, because an organization like the World Bank, they pay attention to monitoring and evaluation. So we are always sending data and all of that, you know. So it was good to know that our work, you know, wasn't just local champion type of work, but we've seen some of our work being, credited. And I mean, there is a FSS program. It's a safety initiative by Ministry of Finance, Budget and Planning, and I think two other focal, Ministry of Education, two other focal ministries. And then we are now one of those states that are piloting that too as well. And usually how you come about who you choose or who you select is based off of, certain indices, So, I mean, in quotes, the world is watching, So, I mean, you can just go and do your random check, I mean, and at that level with some of those organizations, they do that regularly where they send random people or go and verify some of the work here. And then they see that, okay, it actually makes sense. And, we're getting feelers now that, there are more plans in the pipeline too as well. So yeah, there is a budget component, but there's also implementation and then having like partnerships that keep everyone accountable, to the process.
I think my own question would be more about like monitoring and evaluation. Like is it like you said, the quality officers or how do you really monitor it? Because sometimes when you're dealing with a lot of numbers, how many different local governments, how are you able to really monitor that, okay, this program, this policy was implemented and this was the outcome. We have everything. Like, how do you keep track of everything?
So I mean, you guys have been asking really good questions. So one of the ways we've gone about that is to have like a tiered system for monitoring, right? So typically you would have monitoring just at the surface level, so maybe once in a while you just go to some certain places. If those people hear that you're coming, you can do stuff, But building like a grassroots framework around monitoring is also very key, right? So if we say we're embarking on XYZ project, right? And maybe there is a disbursement. So take, for example, the government did an SIG, that School Improvement Grant Program. I think there were about 850 schools, about 4 billion naira, for example. Now, at that level, right, there are the regular systems, right? But there's also the need to ensure that there are also check and balances at the grassroots. So if for that kind of allocation now, say, maybe for a particular school, there was supposed to be a toilet, and then, or maybe 2 toilets, right? And then maybe a boarding facility, for example, and then you give that project, say, 3 months, right? You start to monitor how much is being done with regards to taking off on that project. So at the grassroots level, they are also aware of what they should expect in different zones too, as well, which is one of the reasons why I think our collaboration with the media has been very key, right? So we've made media like critical allies, for our work. So if we are doing projects, we invite them to as well. We even hosted a media a Q1 forecast this year. I think it happened in January, where we invited the media to say, these are the things we've done. Now these are the things we plan to do. Right? And it's not just the regular newspapers and all. We also, engage with local media, right? Now they took that messaging, to the grassroots, right? So when we now go out to say, oh, these are the several projects, right? There's awareness as to what they expect. And then coupled with the sensitization, engaging with them directly, there's collective accountability. And then when you have that, there could still be room for some underhanded methods, because, I mean, we still need to improve the entire, system. But to a large extent, 1 or 2 things, you can easily pick out 1 or 2 things. And then the culture of rewarding good behavior and also reprimanding bad behavior has also been very critical. So
good behavior.
Good behavior. So for example, we have unscheduled monitoring exercises where we leave the the ministry and we go to some of these schools, sometimes unannounced, right? And then we go as far as getting into the classes. So what does the school time or class timetable say you should have now? If you are having English and there is no English teacher, as a concern, right? And then we flag that. Now, good behavior, if we come to a class and we see that the English teacher is there, the English teacher came on time, right? We look through the teacher's notes, we see that the notes are up to date, and then we just conduct random conversations with the children there. There's validation of that, and then we incentivize that. I recall that there was a teacher who was recognized by one of these organizations. I think they won an award or so, right? For obviously their teaching activity and all of that. Then the government went as far as also rewarding the teacher with a vehicle too as well. And then my principal also gave some cash, donation. Nothing beats seeing that your hard work can be rewarded, and it sends a clear message. Now, you may have people who may do some things for eye service, right? Just to look good and all of that. But you can't really maintain that behavior for long, but when you see people who are hardworking and they are diligent and they are, there's that validation across board that they are doing what they ought to do, and you incentivize them, it just makes everybody else sit up. So imagine that teacher, for example, if the teacher was coming in a bike and now he's coming in a car. There's something it does to you. That's what we try to do. And then when we have issues where, we spot some erring behaviors, we address it head on,
But like the teachers now, sorry. For the teachers now, I know there have been states where teachers are not really quality. They don't have they don't meet the qualifications or the benchmark. How do you deal with that in a state where the out of school children are a lot, and even the children in school now, the ratio of teachers to students is pretty low in most Nigerian states? How do you deal with having quality teachers versus getting enough hands on the job?
That's a good question. So there's an initiative called the S-Power Initiative. It was a key concern that we observed, especially with the numbers, right? And so what the governor did was to sort of co-opt extra hands through that initiative. About 7,500 or so, if I would just give a number to that. So these are people, or teachers, these are people who probably have other things that they do, right? But bringing them into, you're teaching just for maybe 6 hours or 7 hours depending. That's daily. So for subject teachers it would vary and all of that, but having those extra hands coming into the system, has changed the game. So you now have a case where people can teach and still do other things, And remember I talked about, inter-ministry, engagement. So there are cases where, some people who are maybe in other ministries, when they hear that, this is happening in education, there's that incentive to say, okay, if it's health, for example, I'm a health worker, so I can probably teach health science or biology and all of that, So that has played a key role. If I'm in Ministry of Agric, for example, I know the farming implements and all. I can probably teach Agric too, So also going about it using that mechanism has, also helped to create a balance. And then obviously there is the need for standardization. Right. So they go through exams. Right. Okay. So we've had cases of even exams at the directorial level. So education is serious business in Katsina now, so.
I was going to ask if you guys use copper, so I guess not.
So yeah, it's a good point too. So there are we have that engagement with core members, and then core members, most of the core members are not from the state.
Yes, definitely.
I'm sure we are familiar with redeploying and all of that. So it has also been to create incentives, right? So for example, in some of those schools, we've built teachers' quarters.
Oh yeah.
Right. So the core members do not have issues with accommodation. At least they can work with that, right? So it helps with, and then I'm not just talking about facilities where they just sleep and, making the place conducive, right? Even within the school, compound. And imagine when a couple is well settled within that. I mean, it won't be a hard sell to say, okay, can you conduct after school lessons and all of those things, So generally it's about putting yourself in every segment or every, personality segment's shoes and saying, okay, at this level, what did you need? So for example, I taught when I was 7.
Oh, really?
Right. Yeah. In Akwa Ibom State. And at the time, the government at the time built a facility for specifically for core members within the school environment. So, I mean, that was something I could work with. So there was a house and then there was solar, right?
Wow.
So, and I mean, it's a big deal.
It was solar.
Right,
There was solar. So, I mean,
interesting.
If there is that, you can negotiate some other things. You can say, okay, if we have this and that, then it's fair point, not to. So yeah, we are seeing more of those, more of the core members staying too as well, and then regular interaction with them as to how can things be better, what can you do, getting ideas from them too as well, So I remember there was a time when we're having, strategy meeting, and then my principal was particular about, how can we make these coppers stay? How can we make this place, feel like a second home to them, know? And then, it was a moment to laugh because of some of the other things that were said, but I mean, the message was very clear, that we need to pay attention to this segment of people and see how we can bring them in.
Yeah.
Coppers are lucky.
I'm sorry to cut you in. You spoke about rewarding good
behavior
and bad behavior. So, like in a situation whereby funds are disbursed, right? You said you people had monitoring. You people monitor all those things. So, in a situation whereby you have things like computers, like tablets, and other materials that you've sent to all those local governments. How do you ensure that they are used for that purposes? Because we have people that are very corny. They will use it for other things.
Yeah, that's a fair point. I mean, I give you a tab. What's to say that you won't use it to maybe open a POS on the side, or so with that, it comes with enforcement. So we're not just paying lip service to monitoring, right? So I give same example. When we distributed those tabs, my principal wanted to see that even those people who were giving the tabs could operate the tabs. So we said, okay, confirm that everybody is digitally literate. And then let's now even see. All right. So we give you the tab, start operating, and then you begin to spot some patterns, right? Some people, that's when they now remember that, funny, you see all sorts of funny things. And then at that level, you now have a sense of how to checkmate those behaviors. So for example, we document the schools that we give them to. The principal is aware, right? And then when we are going for some of those unannounced visitations, right? And we know that, in this school, we gave this, right? When we come, we can check, those devices, and the thing with those devices, because they are coming from recognized vendors, we can also track
them.
some of those things, So I don't want to expose some of these details, but there are ways that we can easily track, utilization, right? And then if you are saying, okay, you're delivering XY intervention with this device, right? The output should show, right? It is when the numbers don't add up, that we now start to, and when we raise a red flag, it's not just for the culprit, it goes all the way up, right? So if there's an erring teacher, best believe that the principal would also have his own share, right? And then best believe that it will cascade up to the director of schools, for example. So it's almost like making everybody on their toes, right? So when we go, for example, for some of those visitations, if there's something she spots that is out of place, first person she's calling is the director of schools. Now, that person is probably not always available because it's probably at the ministry. But then, because he now has to explain, right? And then next person that should give an explanation will definitely be the principal. Everybody knows that this is a regime of accountability, right? So if the teacher is taking the fall, it goes, and then conversely too, if there is good behavior, like I said, it also cascades, so we have those systems in place to make sure that at the very least we can track utilization, and it's ongoing, so with these things, when you start, people find a way around it. So in a sense, you also have to think like them too. So they are innovative in their ways of coming up with other things, and then we also have to follow suit.
So far, what has been one program that you've implemented that has the success has really, given you that satisfaction?
That would be a hard pick, because we've had several, but I think it has been the investment in infrastructure, which has really been impressive. Right.
Sorry, I saw something about a 4 billion grant. Is that?
Yes. So and for all our activities, we try as much as possible to document. So my principal is called Madam Workaholic, right? And so right now she's holding a focal position amongst the commissioners of education in the country, based off of some of the efforts that we've made. So the emphasis on infrastructure has really been very impressive, right? Just last week, there was refurbishment of some schools too, as well, around Batagawa area. So seeing schools that maybe had roofing issues, you may think that it's minimal, until you put yourself in the child's shoes. Maybe when there's rain, for example, or harmattan, for example, and you see that these spaces become very uncomfortable to learn. Even you as an adult, you are having your body is itching you because you can't wait to leave. So imagine those kids in those those environments. So infrastructure has really been very impressive. Building new facilities, refurbishing the old one, and then sort of like enforcing the security systems around, because again, security is usually a critical challenge. So what the government has also done has also been to adopt what we call a state security corps. So this is like paramilitary, right? So what they do, maybe you could term what they do the work of vigilante and all of that, but they've also been empowered too as well. So we have, because there are times when we've gone on the field and we've seen that, some places, were engulfed in fire because of some miscreant activity, and all of that, So yeah, the emphasis on infrastructure has really been, for me, has been like the major thumbs up.
Does that include like technology?
So yes, it does. One of the things we are currently working on is sort of having like a situation room. We've gone far already in that too as well, where we are able to monitor things on the go. So for example, the governor from his phone or from his device can easily access, grassroots data, so to say. Even at the ministry too, we're also able to observe, certain things too as well. So technology has been critical, or having like technology mindedness has really been critical, because the world is now in the age of AI and all of that, and historically we've always been playing catch up, as a country and all of that. So yes, ensuring that more of these tools are available, and finding ways to also improve utilization, has also been technology has been pivotal.
Because I was going to still ask about, it seems like tech you're talking about is maybe cameras or having access to data. But I was going to talk a little bit about like tech in education.
For the
So like for
children.
teachers, how, like we just said, maybe a teacher is using the device for something else.
Yes.
And your principal has to check how they use it and things like that. So is there like training for teachers and for students?
So we have several, there's actually a training roadmap across the several stakeholders, right? So teachers have, sort of like their own focal interventions too. And then we try to make sure that with every training intervention we give, there are like thematic areas that we must always focus on, right? So technology is also key too as well, right? The teacher's appreciation of technology, right? So for example, we've also experimented with, how it is with this day of remote learning and remote everything, right? So we've had several interventions where we have like remote training programs, and we even test for internet or usability and all of that, so we don't do these things like we're throwing interventions at people or at these stakeholders. We even internally, we also we sort of test it amongst ourselves. So my principal, for example, most of our public engagements, there's always a slide, right? There's always, as little as that is, that when you have someone who is that committed to a certain kind of process, you start to see adoption, So as little a thing as making sure that you are sharing reports, right? That your reports meet a certain standard, for example, and we've done, several of these interventions, even with the, directorate too as well, locally and also outside the shores of the country, and the emphasis has always been on whatever intervention is done. So it's almost like a 1 to 5 or 1 to 10, whatever you learn, you must find ways to cascade it to 5 to 10 people, and then we get to see that ripple effect. And then everyone who has partaken or, who has been a beneficiary of any of these interventions, there's also a level of accountability from their own end, right? So, for example, the series of trainings we've done, next 1 year, we'll go back to say, okay, we have the data of people who attended these trainings, right? What has been the level of improvement? And can we verify these things, for ourselves?
So if you were given an opportunity, like to bring up an intervention that will improve education, what do you think you can do? Like if we have enough funds to do that. What do you think you can do to improve the education
I
sector?
mean, on a personal level,
Yeah.
on a personal note.
Yeah.
So for me, it would be, I talked about making learning fun, right? So as a child, I dealt with, I had issues with my attention span. I was the attention deficit, whatever they call it, So holding my attention to one thing was very hard. My parents didn't know or understand why I was, restless and all of that, but over time, obviously with education and all of that, you get to spot something. And I found out that, for me, my best form of learning is when learning is gamified, right? Because I like soccer. I don't play much, but I hope to probably own a club one day, So I could sometimes I could spend, now it's obviously at a calm level, but there are times when I could spend maybe 4 hours, 5 hours, 6 hours gaming, my thumb has the evidence of that, and then there'll be that guilt phase where you'll be like, all this number of hours until, I learned that gaming is not necessarily a bad thing. It helps to improve assimilation and all. Then I found out that even when I would have me interact with kids, coming up with concepts for them to learn things fast and, pick up things, So for me, I would probably want to see how to make like learning gamified, some of these kids, the boys, for example, and Ahmed Musa is a hero for them, right? Any of those icons, so you could cascade it to Lionel Messi or Ronaldo. Let's not have the Ronaldo Messi debate here. But so for them, imagine if, and I mean, someone like Ahmed Musa has done a great job with giving back to society and all of that. But imagine if in capturing, in understanding that, they have interest in soccer, right? You can find ways to transfer that same interest to education seamlessly, right? It changes the game, So for some of these children, the difference between turning out to be successful or not could just be one creative process away, So I would want to, if I had the resource, I would love to see what gamified learning could look like. So for example, if you read this number of pages, maybe we have like a user board for the kids, right? Every child imputes their data and all of that. And then for every time they log in certain hours of reading, they automatically score points. And then just by seeing that my score is 25 and my peer score is 50 or 70, it's already a basis for competition. And then imagine if they now have reward mechanisms off of those score points. You say, okay, anybody that reaches 100 gets a treat. That's all you need though.
I think I've seen, there's YouTube, they had this game that they always used to bring up. It was for maths, but it was like, I think it was like a story, like an actual cartoon, but then it also had like the game part of it. So like you could score rewards when you get a certain number of questions. And then even during the lockdown, I studied some edtech companies and I saw that there were quite a few that were actually doing that gamified learning and the response was massive. But post-pandemic, I don't know what has happened. But so I want to ask, how exactly do you formulate these policies?
That's an interesting question. I'm still in, I won't say I'm new to the job. I'm almost clocking 1 year.
Wow.
But so I'll take it from the layman's perspective, right? A policy is almost like an enforcement mechanism. So if you remove the Y and you put the E, you'd have police, right? So before you have enforcement, you must probably have some things that you are trying to correct, right? So when you think about it from that perspective, drilling it down to first principles and the basics, you're asking, what are the critical problems,
Okay.
right? And how can you use, a process to drive it at scale, right? And, the space is, largely civil service, dominated, right?
Yes.
So everybody understands what a memo is, right? So just bringing it down to that basic level, so we started with focal areas. Principal is very biased towards literacy and skills development.
Yeah.
So she's very big on what you can do with your hands, from an entrepreneurial point of view. So we looked at it from that lens to now say, what are those things that we can institute to drive adoption? So then we had partners on ground who were already doing so much, so we looked at what we are not really fans of, just reinventing for reinventing's sake, right? We paid attention to what was working, what was not working. And then, through several monitoring exercises, you get to see that, maybe there's an issue with compliance for schools. So we have private schools, we have public schools. Many people think that our focus is on public schools, but it's actually on both, right? So private schools have certain obligations too as well. So when you notice that, some of those obligations are not being met, you go back to sort of like, the driving policy documents, and then you say, okay, is there something that addresses this? If there is none, you implement it. And then the government, when the government assumed office, they had a mantra called BYF, Build Your Future. Okay. That was sort of like the government's campaign promise and all. So within that framework, there was already something for education. So we also looked at that to say, okay, what are those things that we can tie into? And then when you have like a responsive government, feedback is usually one of the key aspects of driving policy formulation. Because when you get feedback as to XYZ needs to be improved, you then know that you have to go back to the drawing board. So another thing that we did when we resumed was to have town hall meetings across the senatorial zones, 3 senatorial zones. And I think we had maybe like 1,500, 2,000 plus, folks in attendance in averagely.
Wow.
So obviously people at different levels and all. So we got feedback from them, then we went back to the drawing board. Obviously you prioritize feedback. If you are getting feedback, a type of feedback multiple times, that means that you should pay attention to it. So some of the things that were resonating were issues around, security and access to schools and all of that. So that then drove some of our implementation efforts.
Okay, so how do you make policies that are sustainable? Because I've noticed that in government, and if you observe, most times it's like, I'm here, I'm new, my own is different. Like, you guys were doing a great work, that's good, but this is what I want to do. There's no they don't continue consistency. Instead, everybody wants to do their own thing. So how do you, is it a thing about you? Like, is it you that sets that system, a system where it's sustainable, or is it just about the person actually continuing the work?
So that's a good question. Much of what we can do is limited by time frame, right? So very soon elections will start, and all of that, but I think one way we can make some of these policies sustainable is by the culture that we institute, right? Which is why our strategy has several layers. So if we institute a culture of accountability, people get used to knowing that they'll be accountable for their actions, right? By default, remember, when there is maybe a change, right? The change usually happens, much of the change happens at the top. right? But the middle and the base would largely remain the same. So even if, for example, we leave, after a certain duration, some of those teachers would still be around,
Yes.
for a long time.
True.
So, and at the heart of any success policy-wise is what happens on the ground. So yes, at the top things may change, but at the grassroots, not much will change in terms of the personnel, unless maybe there are transfers. And even if there are transfers, that means that we've also successfully strengthened other systems too. Because if there's a culture of diligence and excellence here, and then this person is transferred to another ministry, it means that to a large extent they will carry that, culture. So that, I think culture is at the heart of, sustainability. And then if we do an impressive work, which I'm sure we're already on that path, it makes it difficult for whoever is coming after the duration that we are there to do any less. Because what you then have is like, there's a standard, right? So it will be obvious that you dropped the ball. So that's one healthy paranoia that I think is one thing that keeps us awake at night. How that we hope that we are doing the best that we can do. And it won't be a situation that when our phase elapses, someone comes and like, these people, they didn't do anything, that kind of a thing. So if we set the standard really high, it will be difficult to do less.
You can't come in and be slacking.
It will be difficult
and
to
I
do
love
less.
that there's so much, attention. You guys are paying so much attention to this because this is basic education. Like you start from here, if this foundation is strong, it just makes as they progress, it's easier.
Yes, it is.
And even the graduates, like you have people that enter university and they don't even know what they are doing. They finish primary school, secondary school, they are investing and there's like nothing to show for it. So just before we go, do you have anything that you want to share with us? Anything at all? Maybe you want to share. We've not touched on it yet.
I think we've covered pretty much everything. Well, maybe what I can add that we've probably not mentioned is how that, or maybe we touched it in passing, but how that we need to drive inclusivity. So for example, having more participation from the women folk, even at a managerial or an administrative level, right?
Yes.
So the paradigm around, my principal is female, so there's that, obviously the bias or as to, what can a woman do and all of that, and normalizing the fact that women are not a substandard.
Yes, thank you very much for saying that.
I think they bought me, right? So I think we don't get to do that or say that. No, we didn't get to implement that enough. We may do a lot of saying, but the doing part, we need to do more, so, and that's another thing also we are keeping an eye on. And so there's a balance to it. So it's not just focus on women just for women's sake, right? I think the stats have proven that when you empower more women, you have a more stable society. Right. So
I hope everybody heard that.
So having to, get more women engaged at the administrative level, providing them with enough incentives too as well. Because culturally there's already a paradigm, but getting them to see that they too can actually get to certain levels, and maybe work-life balance may be a myth in the sense that the balance doesn't balance, right? But at least you can have some stability, from an integration perspective as to prioritize family, but still do the best you can do with work and
Grace, any takeouts, anything?
I think it's just from everything you said, like it's a lot of work.
Yeah.
And one thing that really caught my attention was when you mentioned your partnership with the media.
Yeah.
Because most times what could happen is people are separated from what's going on.
Yeah.
They don't know what's going on.
Yeah.
The reality of things.
Yes. So the way people's minds work, people start to make assumptions.
Yeah.
And the things they hear from other people that government is not doing this, they don't care about this, they don't care about that. Which in some cases could be true. But in cases where it's true and people do not know that the government is actually after their best interest, or certain policies are not working, or policies that you've put in place which are supposed to take a longer time to manifest. But during that space of time, people are going to experience a bit of hardship for things like that. So I think that was really significant for me, like having the media involved. Yeah, that's it for me.
Grace.
And for me, I think when you spoke about not having to involve women enough in the educational space and in, let's say, in politics generally in Nigeria, I believe in the Connaught is actually a thing of she's a woman, why will a woman like be the head of this? Why will a woman be the head of that? I think we need to sensitize people more about the strength of a woman, because a woman because I believe when a woman is set to do something, she does it with the whole of her heart. Like she goes 100%, she goes 1,000 miles just to get those things done. So I think that's that for me. And then when we sorry to add when we talk about the driving force, you know, when you have a driving force in a particular thing, you tend to do do well at it. Okay, like somebody like me, I think my driving force is I hate bullying. I hate anything that has to do with abuse. So when I get to hear anything about it, like I get cringed, like that's anger in me. Today when I was coming to work, I was hearing something about Brekete family, at Brekete family, a child that was molested, you know, like I just got angry all of a sudden. You could see the switch in my face. Like, so I think that driving force is just that push. And I love the fact that you always see your daughter when you see when you go to all those grassroots, you understand to reach out to children. Shout out to her.
She'll watch this episode sometime in the future.
Definitely. So I think that's something to hold on to.
For me, I think my major takeout is that you cannot do education alone. It involves everybody. A child is raised by the community. And then in terms of giving education, the quality of education, partnerships are key. Everybody can have, even if like Ministry of Health, I mean, you wonder, what do they have to do with education? But somebody from there can come and teach health science, you know, like partnerships can work in different ways. So let's not limit that. That's my major takeout. So it's been a wonderful conversation. And I hope Mr. Kizito has enjoyed his time here. I know he has. He's very smiling. I know he has. Thank you so much once again. Thank you. So remember to like, share, comment, subscribe, turn on your post notifications. Be the first to know when we have a new video up. Thank you so much. See you same place, same time next week. Bye.
Bye.